Yeah, so it's important that when we interpret the Bible, that we take the genre of literature in consideration. Right? We've got Psalms, we've got wisdom, we've got historical books, we've got poetic books, we've got didactic, we've got apocalyptic, right? So we're talking about. So we see that like in the book of Daniel, especially Revelation. Obviously, is an apocalyptic book, but there's other types of styles in there. But that's what is ultimately being overlooked the most is that Jesus is using this kind of apocalyptic imagery. They call it cosmic collapse language. And so those that are primarily a futurist perspective, because of how they've started their interpretation of the Bible, have taken it literally, they now force that hermeneutic onto that passage, that genre in the Old Testament they will interpret as not being literal, as actually being apocalyptic, metaphorical. It's supposed to be supposed to be that kind of language to create this vivid picture of a huge cataclysmic event. It's not a literal world collapsing, stars crashing in. And so, futurist perspectives or futurist approaches, I think, have really missed that, and they skip over it. I even see those that are very consistent in how they interpret the genres of Scripture, and even get to this passage of Matthew and still follow that same vein of futurists away from the context. Because why? They box themselves in to say that everything here is literal, and therefore when Jesus uses these words, we must take it literal. I think that really it damages the interpretation. It really, in a sense, creates inconsistency, and it starts to really you can't sustain it. Now, that doesn't mean there weren't any kind of supernatural signs. We call them portents, where basically there was views in the sky that the first century writers outside the Bible, especially one named Josephus, saw things that were very phenomenal type things in the sky, but they were not what Jesus talked about. They believed that type of stuff happened as kind of the outcome of what this world collapse was doing. Because here's the thing: we recognize, especially in the Old Testament, that there was a spiritual reality behind what we see. We're talking about Daniel, about the angel coming and say he's been battling for 3 weeks. Right now, he's coming to see him in a sense. So there's this kind of spiritual warfare going on behind the scenes, and somehow in God's way of revealing redemptive history, those things manifest themselves. And so there are those that do see those things. So we're never discounting that God can't create a certain kind of vision, but what do we have to go on? We have to go on the genre of literature that we see throughout the Old Testament, and that is the contextual reference for the disciples. And so we want to stay in that and be consistent. And I think a premillennial premillennial futurist perspective, again, they veer away from that, and it's very, very clear when you read their commentaries. One of the arguments is that, well, it has to do with dating of the book of Revelation, right? So the idea is, from modern interpreters will say that the book of Revelation was written around 80, 90, 80, 85, right around there, whereas a preterist perspective sees it as prior to 70 AD, 80, 70. And so I think what happens is that when you look at the Olivet Discourse and you follow the context of it, the fact about this generation seeing these things, that kind of interpretation demands an early date writing of the book of Revelation. I mean, when you look at dating books, it's a very challenging business to get into, but you look at the internal witness, the external witness, you look at how anything historically you can identify with it, you look at themes, you look at phrases, you look at are the other apostles, they use similar language as well. Like there's a thought that even that the apostle Paul actually had read the book of Revelation because he uses a phrase of it in his Thessalonian books. That's kind of interesting. But so what I'm saying is that the book of Revelation, the timing of it, in light of the context of the gospel, specifically of what I've shared in the Olivet Discourse, demands an early date writing of that one. I mean, for the temple, there's no mention of temples. If anything, is mentioned in Revelation 11 about it being measured and how much time is going to be there before it comes down. Obviously, that's still to come because of the manner in which the authors use that language.